to carry on till he is in the profession, or rather till his end. So a very pertinent and a very relevant topic which you have chosen and asked me, requested me to prepare some paper and deliver on it. And indeed, it's very relevant, especially for the practitioners in the High Court, because often they use the scope and the power of Section 482 by practitioners, especially in criminal side, have thrown up several issues depending upon different facts of the case and different situations. And it's a very vast topic. As you know, law in itself and every particular subject of law is such a vast subject in itself that if you keep on working on that subject, maybe one lifetime is also not enough. So this inherent power of the High Court under Section 482 is one such power which has been widely used, and sometimes the litigants have also tried to take a chance by resorting to Section 482 of the CRPC for quashing of various kinds of orders, interlocutory orders which are passed by the subordinate courts in criminal matters from time to time. And this has given opportunity to the judiciary, to the higher judiciary, to delve upon each such situation and develop the law. So as I proceed today, the topic being very wide, I have divided it into subtopics and subheads, and I would be addressing every subtopic one after the other with subheads, which will make the understanding of the inherent powers of the High Court hopefully much more easier and lucid for all of you, and including myself. It has been a learning experience for me also, preparing for the webinars or attending webinars or workshop. It actually helps you to again revisit the subject and become more enlightened. So, first of all, I would like to start from the scope of the inherent power under Section 482 vis-a-vis the constitutional provisions. Section 482 Criminal Procedure Code 1973 is a verbatim reproduction of Section 561A of the Criminal Procedure Code of 1898. The question that arose was whether the inherent power of the High Court is conferred by or has the sanction of enacted law. In one of the celebrated judgments in the case of Ratilal Bhanji versus Assistant Collector of Customs, AIR 1967, Supreme Court 1639, the Apex Court, after referring to Article 225 of the Constitution, held that the article enacts that the jurisdiction of the existing high courts and the powers of the judges thereof in relation to administration of justice shall be the same as immediately before the commencement of the Constitution. The Constitution confirms and revests in the high courts all its existing powers and jurisdiction, including its inherent powers and its power to make rules. When the Constitution or any enacted law has embraced and confirmed the inherent powers and jurisdiction of the High Court, which previously existed, that power and jurisdiction has the sanction of an enacted law. Now, if we read Section 482, saving of inherent powers of High Court, it starts with the expression, nothing in this code shall be deemed to limit or affect the inherent powers of the High Court to make such orders as may be necessary to give effect to any order under this code, or to prevent abuse of the process of any court, or otherwise to secure the ends of justice. So as you can see, the wording of this provision itself indicates that it is not something which is being conferred specifically by virtue of this section. It's rather the saving of the inherent power of the High Court, which already exists. And why there is such a provision? Because these powers inhere in the High Court and spring from its very nature and constitution as a court of superior jurisdiction. All the existing powers of the High Courts were preserved and continued by the legislature from time to time. The apex court in Raghuvir Saran versus State of Bihar, 1964, 2 SCR 336, while addressing this question as to the powers of the High Court under Section 561A of the Code of 1898, in regard to expunging remarks made in the judgment or order by a court against a person who is neither a party nor a witness to the proceeding, observe that it does not confer and was not intended to confer any new powers on the High Courts. The courts exist not only for securing obedience to the law of the land, but also for securing the ends of justice in its widest sense. All courts, including the High Court, can exercise such powers as the laws of the land confer upon them, as well as such inherent powers to do justice as are preserved expressly or are not taken away by a statute. So, powers under Section 482 are something which are inalienable attribute of the High Court for the position it holds with respect to the courts subordinate to it. These powers are partly administrative and partly judicial. These powers are exercisable every time the High Court finds that there has been a miscarriage of justice. For the procedural laws of the state provide for correction of most of the errors of subordinate courts which may have resulted in miscarriage of justice. Inherent powers are in the nature of extraordinary powers available where no express power is available to the High Court to do a particular thing, and where it expresses where its express powers do not negative the existence of such inherent power. There are threefold objects of it. It is to give effect to an order under the Code of Criminal Procedure, or for preventing an abuse of the process of the court, or for otherwise securing the ends of justice. However, it is always reminded that the wider the power, the expansive the power, in practice it is to be exercised in exceptional cases. It is not an unrestricted power to make any order which the High Court desires to pass. In the case of Jhandu Pharmaceutical Works Limited versus Muhammad Saraful Haq, the reasons behind grant of inherent powers to High Court under Section 482 was stated in the following words, quote, "No legislative enactment dealing with procedure can provide for all cases that may possibly arise. Courts therefore have inherent powers apart from express provisions of law which are necessary for proper discharge of functions and duties imposed upon them by law." That is the doctrine which finds expression in the section which merely recognizes and preserves inherent power of the High Court. In the case of Hamida versus Rashid, 2008, Volume 1 SCC 474, the Apex Court observed that it is well established principle that every court has inherent power to act ex debito justitiae to do that real and substantial justice for the administration of which alone it exists, or to prevent abuse of the process of the court. In State of Punjab versus Davinder Pal Singh Bhullar, 2011, 14 SCC 770, it was again held that the rule of inherent power has its source in the maxim quando lex aliqui concedere videtur id sine quo res ipsa esse non potest, which means that when the law gives anything to anyone, it gives also those things without which the thing itself could not exist. Again, in Gyan Singh versus State of Punjab, which I will refer to in greater detail later on, reported in 2012, 10 SCC 303, the Apex Court at para 53 held, quote, it is equally well settled that the power is not to be resorted to if there is a specific provision in the code for the redress of the grievance of an aggrieved party. It should be exercised very sparingly, and it should not be exercised as against the express bar of law engrafted in any other provision of the code. Further, at para 44, the Apex Court held that under section 482, these are the twin objectives to be achieved: A, to prevent abuse of the process of any court, or B, to secure the ends of justice. They are a sine qua non. Similarly, in the case of CBI versus Ravi Shankar Srivastav, 2006, 7 SCC 188, it was held by the Apex Court that, quote, while exercising powers under the section, the court does not function as a court of appeal or revision. Inherent jurisdiction under this section, though wide, has to be exercised sparingly, carefully, and with caution, and only when such exercise is justified by the tests specifically laid down in the section itself. Time and again, issues have arisen as to when interference with criminal proceedings is warranted by the High Court. In the case of Santosh Dev versus Archana Guha, 1994, 2 SCC 420, the Apex Court at para 15 of the report cautioned in the following words: unless a grave illegality is committed, the superior court should not interfere. They should allow the court which is seized of the matter to go on with it. There is always an appellate court to correct the errors. One should keep in mind the principle behind section 465 CRPC. Any and every irregularity or infraction of a procedural provision cannot constitute a ground for interference by a superior court unless such irregularity or infraction has caused irreparable prejudice to the party and requires to be corrected at that stage itself. Such frequent interference by superior courts at the interlocutory stages tends to defeat the ends of justice instead of serving those ends. It should not be that a man with enough means is able to keep the law at bay. That would mean the failure of the very system. In the case of State of Punjab versus Kasturi Lal, 2004, 12 SCC, page 195, the Apex Court referred to the celebrated judgment decision in the case of R.P. Kapoor versus State of Punjab, AIR 1960, Supreme Court 866, where the Apex Court had summarized some categories of cases where inherent powers can and should be exercised to quash the proceedings. One, where it manifestly appears that there is a legal bar against the institution or continuance, for example, want of sanction. 2. Where the allegations in the first information report or complaint taken at its face value and accepted in their entirety do not constitute the offense alleged. 3. Where the allegations constitute an offense, but there is no legal evidence adduced, or the evidence adduced clearly or manifestly fails to prove the charge. I would later on expatiate on these subtle categories, referring to few other examples of cases which we have come across in recent times. Further, in the case of CBI versus Ravi Shankar Srivastav, 2006, 7 SCC, page 188, the Apex Court again relied upon the case of R.P. Kapoor and elaborated on point 3 further in the following words at para 9. In dealing with the last case, it is important to bear in mind the distinction between a case where there is no legal evidence or where there is evidence which is clearly inconsistent with the accusations made, and where there is legal evidence which on appreciation may or may not support the accusations. When exercising jurisdiction under section 482, the High Court would not ordinarily embark upon an inquiry whether the evidence in question is reliable or not, or whether on a reasonable appreciation of it, accusation would not be sustained. The scope of exercise of power under section 482 of the Code and the categories of cases where the High Court may exercise its powers under it relating to cognizable offences to prevent abuse of process of any court or otherwise to secure the ends of justice were set out in some detail by the Apex Court in State of Haryana versus Bhajan Lal, 1992, Supplementary 1, SCC 335, which we often rely upon. In the case of Bhajan Lal, the following categories were enumerated at para 102 of the report in the Supreme Court cases. 1. Where the allegations made in the first information report or the complaint, even if they are taken at their face value and accepted in their entirety, do not prima facie constitute any offense or make out a case against the accused. In order to remember this all categories, you can actually coin certain abbreviations. Like for para 1, I for myself have an abbreviation face value. So face value of allegation do not prima facie constitute any offense. Now clause 2 or sub-para 2, where the allegations in the first information report and other materials. Now other materials comes into picture. If any, accompanying the FIR do not disclose a cognizable offense, justifying an investigation by police officer under section 156(1) of the Code, except under an order of a magistrate within the purview of section 155(2) of the Code. So here, the first information report and the materials do not justify an investigation by the police at the first instance, as they do not disclose a cognizable offense. 3. Where the uncontroverted allegations made in the FIR or complaint and the evidence collected in support of the same do not disclose the commission of any offense and make out a case against the accused. Now, this category of cases can be of such nature where the evidence has also been collected and thereafter a decision has to be taken whether the exercise of the power by the trial court at the stage of framing of charge or at the stage of cognizance was really proper, because no case was made out against the accused. 4. Where the allegations in the FIR do not constitute a cognizable offense but constitute only a non-cognizable offense, comma, no investigation is permitted by a police officer without an order of the magistrate under section 155(2) of the Code. 5. Where the allegations made in the FIR or complaint are so absurd and inherently improbable that on the basis of which no prudent person can ever reach a just conclusion that there is sufficient ground for proceeding against the accused. So the abbreviation could be absurd allegations or inherently improbable allegations in the FIR. 6. Where there is an express legal bar engrafted in any of the provisions of the code or the act concerned, under which a criminal proceeding is instituted, to the institution and continuance of the proceedings, or where there is a specific provision in the code or the act concerned providing efficacious redress for the grievance of the aggrieved party. So this contemplates one legal bar and the other efficacious other remedy under the code itself or act itself. 7th, where a criminal proceeding is manifestly attended with malefides and or where the proceeding is maliciously instituted with an ulterior motive for wreaking vengeance on the accused and with a view to spite him due to privilege, private and personal grudge. Now, on this particular clause, there are judgments later on also, which I would touch upon during course of my deliberation today, which could show that malafide in itself at the stage of investigation of a case may not be used to exercise this power, because there is a statutory power under the code for the police to investigate a cognizable offense, and if the allegations do prima facie are making out a case, then restraint is required to be exercised in exercise of this power under section 482. Now, the further subheading on which I think would take few minutes to draw your attention, and which often comes across in our day-to-day practice as professionals, is what is the scope of the power of the High Court to quash the proceeding instituted on a complaint. In the case of CBI versus Ravi Shankar Srivastava, which I earlier pointed out, the Apex Court has held that in court, I quote itself, in a proceeding instituted on complaint, exercise of inherent powers to quash the proceedings is called for only in a case where the complaint does not disclose any offense or is frivolous, vexatious, or oppressive. If the allegations set out in the complaint do not constitute the offense of which cognizance has been taken by the magistrate, it is open to the High Court to quash the same in exercise of the inherent powers under section 482 of the code. It is not, however, necessary that there should be meticulous analysis of the case before the trial to find out whether the case would end in conviction or acquittal. The complaint has to be read as a whole. If it appears that on consideration of the allegations in the light of the statement made on oath of the complainant that the ingredients of the offense or offenses are disclosed and there is no material to show that the complaint is malafide, frivolous, or vexatious, in that event, there would be no justification for interference by the High Court. The Apex Court further said that when an information is lodged at the police station and an offense is registered, then the malafides of the informant would be of secondary importance. This is what I was referring to under clause 7 or sub-para 7 of Bhajanlal, para 102. It is the material collected during the investigation and evidence led in the court which decides the fate of the accused person. The allegations of malafides against the informant are of no consequence and cannot be by themselves basis for quashing the proceedings. Now, often a case comes to the court invoking section 482 of the CRPC to quash a proceeding at an initial stage. In that regard, what is the judicial trend and what are the decisions rendered by the Apex Court that I am now going to refer hereinafter? In State of Orissa versus Saroj Kumar Sahu, 2005, 13 HCC 540, the Apex Court at para 14 of the judgment stated, quote, "It is to be noted that the investigation was not complete, and at that stage it was impermissible for the High Court to look into materials the acceptability of which is essentially a matter for trial. While exercising jurisdiction under Section 482, it is not permissible for the court to act as if it was a trial court. Even when charge is framed at that stage, the court has to only prima facie be satisfied about the existence of sufficient ground for proceeding against the accused. For that limited purpose, the court can evaluate material and documents on record, but it cannot appreciate evidence. So there is a difference between evaluation of the materials and documents to come to a prima facie view rather than appreciating the evidence like a trial court. The court is not required to appreciate evidence to conclude whether the materials produced are sufficient or not for convicting the accused. Further, in the case of Union of India versus Prakash P. Hinduja, 2003, volume 6 SCC, page 195, the apex court at para 20 of the report held that the legal position is absolutely clear and also settled by judicial authorities that the courts would not interfere with the investigation or during the course of investigation, which would mean from the time of lodging of the first information report till the submission of the report by the officer in charge of the police station in court under Section 173, Clause 2 CRPC, this field being exclusively reserved for the investigating agency. So this is what I was harping upon earlier also, that the investigation process is a statutory duty of the police, and resort or exercise to a power, inherent power under Section 482 should not be resorted or should not be employed to stifle the investigation. In the case of State of Karnataka versus Pastor P. Raju, 2006, 6 SCC 728, the apex court again observed that this power can be exercised to cause the criminal proceedings pending in any court, but the power cannot be exercised to interfere with the statutory power of the police to conduct investigation in a cognizable offense. Now, there are provisions, there are other cases which have come from time to time. One such instance was in the case of Roy VD versus State of Kerala, 2000, volume 8 SCC 590. This was whether the High Court, under its inherent powers, should have exercised the inherent powers to quash a proceeding if the arrest and search was by an officer not empowered or authorized and in violation of Section 41 and 42 of the NDPS Act. The apex court was of the view that exercise of power in the case like this one would indeed secure the ends of justice, because the officer was given that authority after the incidents occurred and after the charge was laid by him. Now, one more important aspect in this regard arises, and it has been the subject matter of a decision rendered by the apex court in the case of HDFC Securities Limited versus State of Maharashtra, 2017, 1 SCC 640. The question is, or the proposition is, whether interference by the High Court is permissible when an order under Section 156, Clause 3 CRPC is made requiring investigation by the police. The apex court at para 27 of the report held that it appears to us that this order under Section 156 3 CRPC requiring investigation by the police cannot be said to have caused an injury of irreparable nature, which at this stage requires quashing of the investigation. The High Court had correctly come to the conclusion that the inherent powers of the court under Section 482 CRPC should be sparingly used. there have been many decisions on the scope of interference at the stage of order taking cognizance by the High Court in exercise of the inherent powers under Section 482. In the case of Rakhi Mishra versus State of Bihar 2017-16 SCC 772, it was held that the order passed by the CJM by which cognizance was taken ought not to have been interfered by the High Court. The facts of the case clearly disclose that cognizable offense were made out against the concerned accused persons regarding whom the order of cognizance was interfered by the High Court. Now, often a question arises whether the High Court can exercise its powers under Section 482 CRPC to set aside an interlocutory order. The decisions rendered in this regard by the Apex Court say that it is now well settled that the High Court does not ordinarily interfere at an interlocutory stage of a criminal proceedings pending in a subordinate court. This was observed in the case of Hooghly Mills Company Limited versus State of West Bengal and another, 2019 SCC Online Supreme Court 1410. It was held that Section 397(2) of the CRPC provides that the High Court's power of revision shall not be exercised in relation to any interlocutory order passed in any appeal, inquiry, trial, or other proceeding. Whereas Section 482 of the CRPC provides that nothing in the CRPC will limit the High Court's inherent powers to prevent abuse of process or to secure the ends of justice. Hence, the High Court may exercise its inherent powers under Section 482 to set aside an interlocutory order, notwithstanding the bar under Section 397, Clause 2. However, it is settled law that this can only be done in exceptional cases. For example, where a criminal proceeding has been initiated illegally, vexatiously, or without jurisdiction. Reference is made to the case of Madhu Lemie versus State of Maharashtra, 1977, 4 SCC 551. It was further observed that there was no exceptional case of illegality or lack of jurisdiction in the interlocutory order of the lower court calling for exercise of the inherent powers of the High Court under Section 482 CRPC. Another interesting issue which often arises before us and is raised by the learned lawyers in various cases is whether the power under Section 482 can be resorted to quash when processes have been issued by the trial court. All of you, I believe, must have come across this celebrated judgment in the case of Nagawa versus V.S. Konjalagi, 1976, 3 SCC 736. The Apex Court, in para 5 of the report, held that they categorize the cases wherein the order of the magistrate issuing process against the accused can be quashed. The cases are illustrative in nature and are as follows. 1. When the allegations made in the complaint or the statement of the witnesses recorded in support of the same, taken at their face value, make out absolutely no case against the accused, or the complaint does not disclose the essential ingredients of an offense which is alleged against the accused. 2. Where the allegations made in the complaint are patently absurd and inherently probable, so that no prudent person can ever reach a conclusion that there is sufficient ground for proceeding against the accused. 3. Where the discretion exercised by the magistrate in issuing process is capricious and arbitrary, having been based either on no evidence or on materials which are wholly irrelevant or inadmissible. And 4, where the complaint suffers from fundamental legal defects such as want of sanction or absence of a complaint by a legally competent authority and the like. Just to elaborate on these category of cases, I would attract your attention to certain recent judgments or decisions rendered by me sitting in the criminal jurisdiction dealing with the fodder scam cases. You see, all of you, I believe, are aware of the celebrated Constitution bench decision in the case of Hardeep Singh versus State of Punjab regarding the exercise of power under Section 319 of the CRPC. Now, just to make a fine distinction without much elaboration on the point, you see, when that power is to be exercised, the power is exercisable as per the decision in the case of Hardeep Singh at the stage of inquiry and trial, and that too on the basis of evidence collected. Now, if the materials collected during investigation have not led to the order of cognizance or the satisfaction of the learned magistrate at the time of taking cognizance to take cognizance and issue process or issue summons against the accused persons at that stage, whether even if during the trial or inquiry after that stage there is no material evidence which has come, can the trial court look upon the same investigating material to use it and exercise that power under Section 319 CRPC? So, in most of the decisions, or rather all of them, the error that was committed or the discretion that was exercised by the learned court was relying upon a material which were part of the investigating material, and not relying upon or not placing any evidence which had come during trial to justify an exercise of extraordinary power under Section 319 CRPC. So, the apex court has, in the case of Nagawa, broadly categorized the type of situations or class of cases where interference can be resorted to. And why interference is to be resorted to under Section 482? Because you have to secure the ends of justice or to prevent the abuse of the process of the court. So, when you search the entire material before you in exercise of the power under Section 482, you have to test the impugned order on these principles and principles like laid down in the case of Hardeep Singh also, where specifically the exercise of power under Section 319 was in question. Now, I proceed to the next subheading. What is the nature and scope of power under Section 482 of the CRPC to quash proceedings after framing of charges? In Satish Mehra versus State, NCT of Delhi, 2012, 13 SCC 614, the apex court, while recognizing the fact that the power to interdict a proceeding either at the threshold or at an intermediate stage of the trial is inherent in a high court, at para 14 of the judgment held in the following words: in fact, the power to quash a proceeding after framing of charge would appear to be somewhat wider, as at that stage the materials revealed by the investigation carried out usually come on record, and such materials can be looked into not for the purpose of determining the guilt or innocence of the accused, but for the purpose of drawing satisfaction that such materials, even if accepted in their entirety, do not in any manner disclose the commission of the offense alleged against the accused. Now, an interesting position or a proposition arises very often again when the interplay of Section 320 CRPC comes vis-a-vis the exercise of power under Section 482. Looking at the proposition, that whether Section 320 limits or affects the powers of the High Court under Section 482. And can it be said that by quashing criminal proceedings, the court has compounded the non-compoundable offenses indirectly? The apex court held in the following words. The apex court said that there does exist the distinction between compounding of an offense under Section 320 CRPC and quashing of a criminal case by the High Court in exercise of inherent power under Section 482. The two powers are distinct and different, although the ultimate consequence may be the same, that is, acquittal of the accused or dismissal of indictment. An incidental proposition which again emerges and has been dealt with in the case of Gyan Singh versus State of Punjab, 2012, 10 SCC 303, is about the nature and scope of the inherent power under Section 482 in relation to quashing of non-compoundable offenses in view of compromise arrived at between the parties. The apex court held rather very distinctively in the following words, which I quote. The High Court has to give regard to the nature and gravity of the crime. In heinous and serious offenses, even though there has been a compromise, the same cannot be fittingly quashed. Our criminal proceedings having civil attributes can be treated on a different footing. In what cases power to quash the criminal proceedings or complaint or FIR may be exercised, where the offender and the victim have settled their dispute, would depend on the facts and circumstances of each case, and no category can be prescribed. However, before exercise of such power, the High Court must have due regard to the nature and gravity of the crime. Heinous and serious offenses of mental depravity or offenses like murder, rape, dacoity, etc. cannot be fittingly quashed, even though the victim or victim's family and the offender have settled the dispute. Such offenses are not private in nature and have a serious impact on society. Similarly, any compromise between the victim and the offender in relation to offenses under special statutes, like the Prevention of Corruption Act or the offenses committed by public servants while working in that capacity, etc., cannot provide for any basis for quashing criminal proceedings involving such offenses. But the criminal cases having overwhelmingly and predominantly civil flavor stand on a different footing for the purposes of quashing, particularly the offenses arising from commercial, financial, mercantile, civil, partnership, or such like transactions, or the offenses arising out of matrimony relating to dowry, etc., or the family disputes, where the wrong is basically private or personal in nature, and the parties have resolved their entire dispute. In this category of cases, the High Court may quash the criminal proceedings if, in its view, because of the compromise between the offender and the victim, the possibility of conviction is remote and bleak, and continuance of the criminal case would put the accused to great oppression and prejudice, and extreme injustice would be caused to him by not quashing the criminal case despite full and complete settlement and compromise with the victim. In other words, the High Court must consider whether it would be unfair or contrary to the interest of justice to continue with the criminal proceeding, or continuation of the criminal proceeding would amount to abuse of process of law despite settlement and compromise between the victim and the wrongdoer, and whether to secure the ends of justice, it is appropriate that the criminal case is put to an end, and if the answer to the above questions is in the affirmative, the High Court shall be well within its jurisdiction to quash the criminal proceeding. Unquote. In the case of Narinder Singh versus State of Punjab, 2014, 6 SCC 466, the apex court elaborately dealt with the rationale for such a treatment and drew the distinction between crimes having societal impact and that having individual impact. The apex court leaned towards the jurisprudential aspect of the sentencing at para 16 and 17 and held, I'll just read the relevant part of para 17. There may be certain cases which are too obvious, namely cases involving heinous crimes with element of criminality against the society and not parties inter se. In such cases, the deterrence as purpose of punishment becomes paramount, and even if the victim or his relatives have shown the virtue and gentility agreeing to forgive the culprit, compassion of that private party would not move the court in accepting the same as larger and more important public policy of showing the iron hand of law to the wrongdoers to reduce the commission of such offences is more important. Cases of murder, rape, or other sexual offences, etc., would clearly fall in this category. After all, justice requires long-term vision. On the other hand, there may be offences falling in the category where the correctional objective of criminal law would have to be given more weightage in contrast with deterrence philosophy. Punishment, whatever else may be, must be fair and conducive to good rather than further evil. If in a particular case, the court is of the opinion that a settlement between the parties would lead to more good, better relations between them, would prevent further occurrence of such encounters between the parties, it may hold settlement to be on a better pedestal. It is a delicate balance between the two conflicting interests which is to be achieved by the court after examining all these parameters and then deciding as to which course of action it should take in a particular case. Then there are instances when the question arises whether an offense under section 307 IPC falls within the crime of serious nature in relation to quashing of proceedings on the basis of settlement between the parties. This proposition was also answered in the case of Narendra Singh versus State of Punjab, which I just referred. At para 29.6 of the report, the apex court, while dealing with this issue, held that however, the High Court would not rest its decision merely because there is a mention of section 307 IPC in the FIR or the charge is framed under this provision. It would be open to the High Court to examine as to whether incorporation of section 307 IPC is there for the sake of it or the prosecution has collected sufficient evidence which, if proved, would lead to proving the charge under section 307 IPC. For this purpose, it would be open to the High Court to go by the nature of the injury sustained, whether such injury is inflicted on the vital/delicate parts of the body, nature of weapons used, etc. Medical report in respect of injuries suffered by the victim can generally be the guiding factor. On the basis of this prima facie analysis, the High Court can examine as to whether there is a strong possibility of conviction or the chances of conviction are remote and bleak. In the former case, it can refuse to accept the settlement and quash the criminal proceeding, whereas in the latter case, it would be permissible for the High Court to accept the plea compounding the offense based on complete settlement between the parties. At that stage, the court can also be swayed by the fact that the settlement between the parties is going to result in harmony between them, which may improve their future relationship. The other question which incidentally arises in this kind of cases is whether to exercise its power under section 482, what is the timing of the settlement? Timing of settlement plays a crucial role. At para 29.7 of the same judgment, the apex court categorized few classes or nature of stage of proceedings. Say first, There are cases where the settlement is arrived at immediately after the alleged commission of offense and the matter is still under investigation. Then the High Court may be liberal in accepting the settlement to quash the criminal proceedings/investigation. It is because of the reason that at that stage, the investigation is still on and even the charge sheet has not been filed. Second, those cases where the charge is framed but the evidence is yet to start or the evidence is still at infancy stage, the High Court can show benevolence in exercising its powers favorably, but after prima facie assessment of the circumstances, materials mentioned above. 3. On the other hand, where the prosecution evidence is almost complete or after the conclusion of the evidence, the matter is at the stage of argument, normally the High Court should refrain from exercising its power under Section 482 of the Code, as in such cases, the trial court would be in a position to decide the case finally on merit and come to a conclusion as to whether the offense under Section 307 IPC is committed or not. Similarly, in those cases where the conviction is already recorded by the trial court and the matter is at the appellate stage before the High Court, mere compromise between the parties would not be a ground to accept the same, resulting in acquittal of the offender who has already been convicted by the trial court. Here, the charge is proved under Section 307 IPC and conviction is already recorded of a heinous crime, and therefore there is no question of sparing a convict found guilty of such a crime. So these are very illustrative and clear guidelines or categories enunciated by the apex court to these judgments, which provide a kind of light to the High Court when it is entertaining petitions or at the stage of exercising its powers, inherent powers under Section 482 of the CRPC, in cases which are of heinous offenses or such like under Section 307 of the IPC. The other proposition which again would come to our mind dealing with the exercise of inherent power under Section 482 is whether this power is exercisable in case of recall or review of its order by the High Court. Very recently, in the case of New India Assurance Company Limited versus Krishna Kumar Pandey, 2019 SCC Online SC 1786, the apex court relied upon the decision in the case of State of Punjab versus Devender Pal Singh Bhullar, 2011 14 SCC 770, and at para 46 of Devender Pal Singh enunciated or reiterated the legal position. If a judgment, I quote, if a judgment has been pronounced without jurisdiction, this is the first category, or second category, in violation of principles of natural justice, or where the order has been pronounced without giving an opportunity of being heard to a party affected by it, or the third category, where an order was obtained by abuse of the process of court, which would really amount to its being without jurisdiction, inherent powers can be exercised to recall such order for the reason that in such an eventuality, the order becomes a nullity and the provisions of Section 362 CRPC would not operate. In such an eventuality, the judgment is manifestly contrary to the audi alteram partem rule of natural justice. The power of recall is different from the power of altering or reviewing the judgment. However, the party seeking recall or alteration has to establish that it was not at fault. As these judicial trends, as the topic of today's webinar also suggests, they point out to certain broad propositions of law which have been summed up in various judgments from time to time, And I would again reiterate, quoting another recent judgment of the Apex Court in the case of Chilaka Murthy, Venkateswaralu, and another versus State of Andhra Pradesh, and another 2019 SEC Online Supreme Court 948, where the Apex Court summed up the law on the exercise of the inherent powers of the court under Section 482 in the following words, para 12 and 13. In fact, para 12 to 19 are all very relevant. The plenary inherent jurisdiction of the court under Section 482 of CRPC may be exercised to give effect to an order under the court, to prevent abuse of the process of the court, and to otherwise secure the ends of justice. 13. Inherent jurisdiction, though wide and expansive, has to be exercised sparingly, carefully, and with caution, and only when such exercise is justified by the tests specifically laid down in the section itself. 14. For interference under Section 482, three conditions are to be fulfilled. The injustice which comes to light should be of grave nature and not of a trivial character. Semicolon. It should be palpable and clear and not doubtful. And thirdly, there should exist no other provision of law by which the party aggrieved could have sought relief. Para 15. While exercising jurisdiction under Section 482, it is not permissible for the High Court to act as if it were a trial court. For that limited purpose, the court can evaluate materials and documents on record, but it cannot appreciate the evidence to conclude whether the materials are sufficient or not for convicting the accused. 16, para 16, the High Court should not, in exercise of jurisdiction under 482, embark upon an inquiry into whether the evidence is reliable or not, or whether on a reasonable appreciation of the evidence, the allegations are not sustainable, for this is the function of the trial judge. 17, the High Court may have an obligation to intervene under Section 482 where manifest error has been committed by magistrate in issuing process, despite the fact that the alleged act did not at all constitute offense. Reference was made to the case of S.W. Palanitkar versus State of Bihar, 2002, 1 SEC 241. Para 18. Power under Section 482 should not be exercised to stifle legitimate prosecution. At the same time, if the basic ingredients of the offense alleged are altogether absent, the criminal proceedings may be quashed. Para 19. It is well settled that where the allegations set out in the complaint or the charge sheet do not constitute any offense, it is open to the High Court, exercising inherent jurisdiction, to quash the order passed by the magistrate taking cognizance of the offense. The inherent powers is intended to prevent the abuse of the process of the court and to secure the ends of justice. Such power cannot be exercised to do something which is expressly barred under the code. So, after this expatiation on the scope of the power under Section 482, I believe another question which often arises in our mind and may have arisen in your mind is the interplay of this revisional power of the High Court under Section 397 of the CRPC. What is the connotation of the term used in Section 397? There are three terms used: correctness, legality, or propriety of any finding, sentence, or order. In this regard, I will refer to few decisions of Allahabad High Court and thereafter the Apex Court also. In the case of Shankar Singh and others versus Emperor, 1929, AR 1929, Allahabad 587. These terms were in question in connection with the old 898 code, that is Section 435. It was said legality and propriety would both include questions of law as to whether a finding, sentence, or order was legal or proper having regard to the evidence. Then there is the word correctness. That does not mean that this court may inquire whether the finding was acceptable to it on a balance of the evidence recorded in the trial court. Listen carefully. The correctness of the finding, sentence, or order also implies a legal defense, such as the finding being based on entire want of evidence or being incorrect in the sense that the witness may have said, for instance, that no theft was committed, and the court may have recorded a finding that theft was committed. So that is the correctness of that finding. Very lucidly explained in this judgment. The power of this court in appeal is totally distinct from the power of this court which can be exercised in revision. Where there is evidence of whatsoever character on which a particular finding of fact may be based, this court is precluded under the terms of section 435 of the old code from interfering with that finding. So please appreciate that appreciation of evidence in revisional power is not permissible. You have to test the correctness, the propriety, and the legality. In the case of Thankapan Nadar versus Gopal Krishnan, 2002, 9 SEC 393, the question was the scope of interference in revisional power in a finding with a finding of acquittal. The apex court categorized few illustrative categories. A, for one, where the trial court had no jurisdiction to try the case, but has still acquitted the accused. 2, where the trial court has shut out evidence which the prosecution wished to produce. 3, where the appellate court has wrongly held the evidence which was admitted by the trial court to be inadmissible. Please remember that this must be a category of cases which in appeal was before the Sessions Court and the revision has lied before the High Court. 4, where the material evidence has been overlooked only either by the trial court or by the appellate court, and where the acquittal is based on the compounding of the offense which is invalid under the law. The apex court also clarified that these are mere illustrations. Now, another proposition which again is interesting, and as I initially told at the start of my address, I have taken quite a long time and in fact appear to be exceeding my limit, that these are subheads of or subtopics which actually address different nuances of the exercise of power under section 482. And if you cut it into different subtopics, then one can be able to appreciate as to how law has developed in that line and what are the judicial trends in that line. The other proposition which I was just going to refer to was whether the inherent power of the High Court under section 482 stands repelled when the revisional power under section 397 is overlaps. In the case of Raj Kapoor, the famous Raj Kapoor versus State, 1981 SEC 43, the apex court relied upon the judgment of the 3 judges bench in Madhulime versus State of Maharashtra, 1977 4 SEC 551, and I would refer and read the compelling opinion of the Honorable Justice Krishna Iyer J, as it is very illuminating and it would throw guidance and light to us. At para 10, the first question is as to whether the inherent power of the High Court under section 482 stands repelled when the revisional power under section 397 overlaps. The opening words of section 482 contradicts this contention, because nothing of the code, not even section 397, can affect the amplitude of the inherent power preserved in so many terms by the language of section 482. Even so, a general principle pervades this branch of law, when a specific provision is made, easy resort to inherent power is not right except under compelling circumstances. Not that there is absence of jurisdiction, but that inherent power should not invade areas set apart for specific power under the same code. In Madhulimye versus State of Maharashtra, this court has exhaustively and, if I may say so with great respect, correctly discussed and delineated the law beyond mistake. While it is true that Section 482 is pervasive, it should not subvert legal interdicts written into the same code, such as, for instance, Section 397(2). Apparent conflict may arise in some situations between the two provisions, and a happy solution, quote, would be to say that the bar provided in subsection 2 of Section 397 operates only in exercise of the revisional power of the High Court, meaning thereby that the High Court will have no power of revision in relation to any interlocutory order. Then, in accordance with one of the other principles enunciated above, the inherent power will come into play, there being no other provision in the code for the redress of the grievance of the aggrieved party. But then, if the order assailed is purely of an interlocutory character, which could be corrected in exercise of the revisional power of the High Court, under the code, the High Court will refuse to exercise its inherent power. But in case the impugned order clearly brings about a situation which is an abuse of the process of the court, or for the purpose of securing the ends of justice, interference by the High Court is absolutely necessary, then nothing contained in Section 397(2) can limit or affect the exercise of the inherent power by the High Court. But such cases would be few and far between. The High Court must exercise the inherent power very sparingly. In short, there is no total ban on the exercise of inherent power where abuse of the process of the court or other extraordinary situation excites the court's jurisdiction. The limitation is self-restraint, nothing more. The policy of the law is clear that interlocutory orders, pure and simple, should not be taken up to the High Court, resulting in unnecessary litigation and delay. Therefore, there is a bar in Section 397 that you cannot challenge it in revisional power because that will unnecessarily delay the main proceeding. At the other extreme, final orders are clearly capable of being considered in exercise of inherent power if glaring injustice stares the court in the face. But in between, there is a tertium quid, as Utwalia Justice has pointed out, as for example, where it is more than a purely interlocutory order and less than a final disposal. The present case falls under that category where the accused complains of harassment through the court's process. Can we state that in this third category, the inherent power can be exercised? In the words of Utwalia J, the quote, the answer is obvious that the bar will not operate to prevent the abuse of the process of the court and or to secure the ends of justice. The label of the petition filed by the agreed party is immaterial. The High Court can examine the matter in an appropriate case under its inherent powers. The present case undoubtedly falls for exercise of the power of the High Court in accordance with 482 of the 1973 Code, even though assumingly, though not accepting, that invoking the revisional power of the High Court is impermissible. In a recent decision, in the case of Prabhu Chawla versus State of Rajasthan, 2016, 16 SCC, page 30. Again, relying upon Raj Kapoor's case, in a very short para, which I will just read for making clear the point. The Apex Court said, we venture to add a further reason in support. Since Section 397 CRPC is attracted against all orders other than interlocutory, a contrary view would limit the availability of inherent powers under Section 482 CRPC only to petty interlocutory orders, a situation wholly unwarranted and undesirable. So, meaning thereby, the Apex Court wanted to convey that inherent powers are very wide and expansive in its scope, and though there is a bar under Section 397 2 to interfere in interlocutory orders, but that does not prevent the High Court invoking Section 482 inherent powers to correct injustice or to secure the ends of justice. Again, there is another incidental question whether under Section 482, the High Court can interfere even after dismissal of revision application. In the case of Krishnan versus Krishna Veni, 1997, 4 SCC 241, it was held that though the revision before the High Court under subsection 1 of Section 397 is prohibited by subsection 3 thereof, inherent power of the High Court is still available under Section 482 of the Code, and it is paramount power of continuous superintendence of the High Court under Section 483. I will kindly draw attention of all of you to Section 483 also, which is often overlooked. The High Court is justified in interfering with the order leading to miscarriage of justice and in setting aside the order of the courts below. Section 482, which is just next to Section 482, if I may say so, is a paramount power upon the High Court for continuous superintendence of a case which is running in her trial court. Similarly, this view was reiterated in another case, 2009 3 SEC 310, in the case of Shakuntala Devi versus Chamru Mahato. Now, there are few instances which I will just touch upon and finally conclude my address. There arises situations where cases come to the court, say, under different special statutes, like the jurisdiction of the High Court under Section 482 was invoked in a case, State of Kerala versus Orison J. Francis, 2009, 2 SCC 160, which arose out of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940. The complaint was filed alleging commission of offense punishable under Section 18C, read with Section 27B, small 2 of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940, against 3 accused persons, that they were manufacturing and selling certain drugs, which are drugs within the definition of Section 3B of the Act without a manufacturing license. A petition under Section 482 CRPC was filed by the accused 1 and 3, taking a stand before the High Court that the alleged drugs seized belong to Ayurvedic category, which is dealt with under Section 3A, whereas the allopathic drugs are defined under Section 3B. A separate chapter, Roman 4A, deals with Ayurvedic drugs, while Roman 4 deals with allopathic drugs. The charge was that the appellants had violated Section 18C of Chapter 4 with respect to allopathic drugs, but the accused were alleging that the article sold was food supplement, and at best it could be an Ayurvedic proprietary drug. Before the High Court, the stand was that whether the goods were Ayurvedic drugs or not. The High Court did interfere in the matter. When the matter went to the Supreme Court, the Apex Court observed that obviously a license was required for dealing with the drugs. The mere fact that the application for license was filed did not entitle the respondent to manufacture and or sell the drugs concerned. Therefore, the High Court was not justified in quashing the proceedings. Whether the goods seized were Ayurvedic drugs could only have been decided in the trial, and the threshold interference by the High Court was uncalled for. In another decision, say in the case of Asabhai Machindra Adagale versus State of Maharashtra, 2009, 3 SEC 789, arising out of the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989, the Apex Court held that the FIR is not expected to be an encyclopedia. Whether the accused belong to the scheduled caste or scheduled tribe can be gone into when the matter is being investigated. Therefore, after ascertaining the facts during the course of investigation, different conclusions could be reached. The High Court placed reliance on an earlier decision of the High Court and had allowed the petition. But the Apex Court allowed the appeal and held that investigation was underway and had to be led to a logical consequence, and then at different stage of the proceedings there were remedies available to the party. As you see, I have tried to touch upon broad topic and the subtopics in the deliberation regarding the scope and exercise of the inherent powers of the High Court under Section 482 and the judicial trends that have been developing or have developed over a period of time because of the decisions of the Apex Court from time to time, arising from decisions of different high courts also, ranging on a very wide nature and category and class of cases and stage of proceedings, etc. I believe that my deliberations today would have thrown some light on the subject, and I believe that it would have had a good impact on the understanding of the scope of inherent powers of the High Court under Section 482. And many a times there are many nuances which all of us lack clarity about different fields of law. So these kind of webinar actually help us to revisit the provision of law and again enlighten ourselves on different propositions and spheres concerning the particular topic. And I'm thankful to the organizers and all of you and Mr. Rahul Sabu for giving me this opportunity to talk to you in this virtual mode. I think I have taken much more than the time allotted to me, but I have been slow in explaining the things so that sometimes the audio is interrupted, sometimes in a virtual mode the point is not put across in a proper way, it gets lost in midway. So hopefully you'll excuse me for that, and rest is left to the learned moderator, Mr. Rahul Sabu. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We are overwhelmed by the wonderful deliberations made by you. You have threadbare explained the provisions of Section 482 of CRPC, the landmark judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court cited by you would be extremely helpful to the legal fraternity. Now, I would request the participants, if they have any questions to be put to the Honorable Justice, they may put one by one.
One query.
Yes,
Rahul ji.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Bhanukumar, we are able to hear you.
Sir, thank you, sir. First, my lords, may kindly be pleased. Very, very illuminating discussion, catena of decisions on various stages. Till now, we only knew the landmark case of Bhajan Lal, but range of decisions with every stage decision and overlapping between this revision and 482. One thing is coming to my mind, my lords. The scope of 482 vis-a-vis criminal writ, there is also a bit of overlapping. Sometimes the clients get confused whether we should file a criminal writ or we should move by way of 482, my lords. We want some illumination on this point.
There is not much, if I may say so, uh, difference in the nomenclature. The nomenclature may be different, but basically the exercise of power under Article 227 or 482 is in a way exercising an inherent power or a supervisory power or an inherent power by the High Court to see that the ends of justice are met, to secure the ends of justice. 227 in a way, a supervisory jurisdiction always has been understood in a manner to see whether the trial court keeps itself within the bounds of its jurisdiction.
My lords.
So 482 is the inherent power that is provided by the court, and if you see, the supervisory jurisdiction of the High Court also traces back itself. As I read Article 225, I think I have read.
Yes.
225 says, I'll read it for just for again clarifying. Subject to the provisions of this Constitution and to the provisions of any law of the appropriate legislature made by virtue of powers conferred on that legislature by this Constitution, the jurisdiction of and the law administered in any existing High Court and the respective powers of the judges thereof in relation to the administration of justice in the court, including any power to make rules of the court and to regulate the sittings of the court and of members sitting alone or in division court, shall be the same as immediately before the commencement of the Constitution. So these are powers which actually flow in a superior court. Nomenclature may differ, yes, but these powers are conferred upon a superior court like a High Court in our country from pre-independence, only to ensure that courts subordinate to it actually are engaged in imparting justice and they do not stray away from the course of justice.
My lords, that is the crux of the matter. My lord has very finely, nicely explained. One is supervisory, other is inherent. And what is coming to my mind, my lords, that the source also, one is coming from the Constitution itself and one is coming from the statute.
Right.
CR. This difference. Obliged, my lord.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir,
any other questions?
Sir.
Yes, Mr. Prabhat.
Yes, sir. There is a, my lord has explained about Gyan Singh case, where the compromise, quashing is allowed sometime on the basis of compromise. When there is a private dispute, there is no public policy involved. But there are some sections which includes both private dispute as well as public policy involved. Well, 420 is one of the sections where if there is a dispute between two parties, some complaint is made with respect to some business transaction. Or in such cases, compromise is generally allowed as per the. But there are other cases where some government money is involved. Somebody has taken some contract, and so I just want to know. So, scope of Gyan Singh case with respect to public policy, where the offenses is of such nature, where there is some private dispute also, and there is a. So, in such cases, how we use the Gyan Singh case? Suppose somebody has taken a contract through illegal means, and he has completed the contract all the way, but there was some dispute between a petty contractor. And that petty contractor has made allegation that he has taken this contract by using some false document, well, committing cheating. In such cases, how the compromise will it?
You see,
Just in the light of Gyan Singh case, I'm just.
You see, your question itself contained the answer also, if I may say so, in the light of Gyan Singh, because the moment there is a color of a offense which affects the society, even though the labeling of the section may be 420, then the court exercising the inherent powers has to actually examine as to how far the offense affects the public injury or the injury to the society, and how far is it limited to a private injury. Now, it's a difficult task because every case poses before the court a challenging task to apply the law or the broad categorizations of the principles to a particular fact of the case. And the guiding lights obviously laid down by the judgments of the apex court, say for example in the case of Gyan Singh, then come to our aid. Then we have to see whether all these 1, 2, 3 elements are actually going in favor of the accused or they are going against him. And then the ultimate objective also has to be seen, whether if the injury is of a private nature and society is not connected with that, as it has been enumerated also, the dispute is of commercial, financial, mercantile, civil, partnership, etc. Then if the parties have compromised, then it would be unnecessary to continue with the criminal prosecution as it would not end up in harmony between the parties, and it would also be subjecting the accused to an unfair or a proceeding which would not lead to a positive result in the end. So these kind of categorizations, broadly speaking, in a deliberation during a workshop or a webinar is not possible because all the facts of a case are not before you. You can talk upon general principles, but when it comes to a particular case, you have to put it in different straitjacket formulas and then weigh the balance as to in which side it actually weighs. Then take a decision. That is a difficult task for the
My lord, my lord.
Hopefully I have answered your
Whether High Court can review its own appellate judgment in
Yes, my lord, I got it.
bar placed by Section 362 of the CRPC, exercising its inherent power. That is my question.
I think I have answered. No. Review is a different thing, but recall for different, without jurisdiction, without opportunity, and nullity.
Yes, ma'am.
So these 3 categories I spoke to you when I was referring to the case of New India Assurance Company versus Krishna Kumar Pandey. So recall and review are totally different things, and many of you would understand the distinction whenever even Article 226 petitions are filed. Sometimes you seek recall. You don't ask for a review, because if you are a necessary party and the judgment has been delivered without impleading you as a party or without noticing you who is the affected party, then you don't go for a review of the order. You invoke Article 226 for recall of the order. There is a celebrated case of 2004. Mr. Krishna Murari is sitting there. He must remember. State of Haryana versus Paula Singh.
Lordship.
So that's an exercise of power of recall. So recall and review are totally different.
Milords, in fact, Milords, now this issue regarding recall and review, Milords, has been referred to the full bench, Milords, in one of the judgments, Milords. Because that is the confusion, Milords, that is prevailing from since long. Then from Milords, that Milords, Madhulime case, etc., everything has been referred to larger bench, Milords. To recall, just to clarify this issue, Milords.
Yes. Any other question? I must tell that this audience is very receptive, and I'm glad to see all your faces from time to time, people taking down notes also. And
We are
hopefully,
very glad, Milords, to see your Lordship at this moment, Milords.
Any more
Yes.
questions from the participants?
One question.
Yes, Mr. Ram Prakash Singh, your face is not
My lord.
visible, but I can identify your voice.
My lord, I must thanks for the erudite. First of all, my lord, I must thanks for the erudite and scholarly exposition in a deliberation, my lord. My
Thank you.
question would be, my lord, my lord, my question would be, my lord, generally the 482 power is to be invoked in a final order, my lord. But generally it has been seen, my lord, in 317 rejection of an application under 317 CRPC, my lord. 482 interpretation has to be entertained, my lord. Final order has been passed, my lord. Whether it is permissible.
I would rather not comment upon it because this is not the forum to comment upon it, but the broad distinctions have to be carried out to be kept in mind that even though certain interlocutory orders may not be revisable because of the bar under section 397(2),
397,
but if it appears to the court under section 482 that it would be an abuse of the process of court, then the court can exercise that power, but that power has to be exercised in an exceptional situation very sparingly. And that is why one has to test it from different angles. It has to be tested from different angles. That's a huge task, and it should not be done casually. It should not be done casually or in a cavalier manner. I had the opportunity, or rather that burden of exercise, dealing with such cases, and it was quite a challenging task.
Lordship permission, my lords.
Yes.
Those type of orders, my lords, sometimes is being nomenclated as the intermediary order, my lords.
That is what.
And there are judgments, my lords, upon which, my lords, it has been resolved that if the order have a color of, my lords, if not fully final, my lords, even if it has a plus a tint of being, my lords, affecting the rights of, my lords, making a final decisive nature, it is, my lords, revisable in the name of the, my lords, intermediary order, my lords.
Yes. That is what in fact, all judgments lay down.
Lordship.
Yes, any more?
And the interlocate, my lord. Oblige, my lord. Oblige.
My lord, I have a very, my lord, subject to my lord's kind permission.
Yes, Abhijit.
My lord.
Yes.
My lord, the new jurisprudence of SC/ST Act, my lord.
Yes.
My lord, there are cases in which provisions are
Yes.
under that act, my lord. My lord, in that situation, my lord, we have two options. Either we can go under 482, or my lord, section 17 provides that every order is appealable, my lord.
Yes.
So, my lord, with rise of this new jurisprudence of SC/ST Act, my lord,
Yes.
what would be the better way?
Depends upon the stage at which you are trying to invoke that provision.
My lord.
So you see, SC/ST Act, if on the face of it the offense is not made out, any of the ingredients are not made out, people generally invoke section 482 to seek protection. But if it is at a later stage when such a power is exercised by the trial court, and you have a lot of materials on the basis of which the power is exercised, then whether the exercise of that power is proper or not and the appreciation is correct or not can be seen in the appellate jurisdiction. But in 482, that appreciation of the evidence will not be done.
So, if prima facie case is not made out, my lord, 482 would be a proper way.
That's the big catch, actually. As you saw in the last case which I cited, the apex court said that investigation could reveal whether the accused was a scheduled caste or a scheduled tribe, and then so many more materials would come. So therefore, at every stage, the remedy to invoke the forum of the higher court is there at the stage of framing of charges, stage of cognizance, etc. So therefore, it was not desirable that that power should have been exercised. So it's always a difficult proposition and depends upon the facts and circumstances, the gravity, etc., nature of the case. Generalization we should actually keep in mind, but individual facts will have to be tested on its own merits.
My lord, much obliged, my lord.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would request our advocate, Mr. Avnish Ranjan Mishra, to convey the vote of thanks to the Honorable Justice and the participants.
थैंक यू साबू जी, थैंक यू। सबसे पहले सर्वप्रथम मैं इस प्रकार के श्रृंखलाबद्ध आयोजन के हेतु अनवरत और अविराम प्रयास के लिए राहुल साबू जी का धन्यवाद ज्ञापन करता हूं। तत्पश्चात माननीय न्यायमूर्ति श्री अपरेश कुमार सिंह जैसे विधिवेत्ताओं को, उद्भट विधि के विद्वानों को इस मंच पर सुनने का अवसर प्रदान हुआ। अभी माननीय न्यायमूर्ति महोदय ने जिस प्रकार से विषय की सरल और सांगोपांग व्याख्या की है, इसके परावर्तन ने ये बताया हम लोगों को कि इसके नेपथ्य में, बिहाइंड द कर्टेन, बैक ऑफ स्टेज, ऑनरेबल जस्टिस ने बहुत सारी इसके पीछे परिश्रम किया हुआ है और उनके परिश्रम का प्रतिफल हम लोगों को जूसक सरल और सहज भाषा में मिला। इसके लिए माननीय न्यायमूर्ति महोदय का तहे दिल से हार्दिक आभार, हार्दिक धन्यवाद। और साथ ही सभी श्रोताओं का जो इस मंच पर उपलब्ध रहे, इतने समय तक रसास्वादन करते रहे विषय वस्तु का, और साथ में जितने तकनीकी लोग इस आयोजन के, इस वेबिनार के सफल आयोजन हेतु सतत प्रयासरत रहे, सभी का तहे दिल से हार्दिक आभार, हार्दिक धन्यवाद। उम्मीद है, अपेक्षा रहेगा कि साबू जी ऐसे आयोजनों का श्रृंखलाबद्ध करते रहेंगे और हम लोग इस तरह से विषय का रसास्वादन करते रहेंगे। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Rahul, and thank you, Avnish ji, and thank you everyone who has participated in this webinar. And I can only congratulate you for taking this initiative. Long back, I must share, when I was in the profession, I always used to share my feelings with other colleagues, many of whom have now become senior also, that some kind of an interactive, fertile discussion amongst the members of the bar should happen at an appropriate fixed time and date every fortnight or every weekend on a Friday, and some or the other judge, honorable judge can be invited. You have many senior counsels who come to the High Court from different places, Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, and other places. You can request them to spare time to address them. So, of course, this has finally taken shape because of the pandemic in a virtual platform. And the good part of it is that it is inexpensive. Everybody can join at his own leisure. You don't have to commute. And people can address the webinar from different places. A senior advocate or a retired honorable judge or a sitting judge can address this forum from anywhere in Delhi or any part of the country. So you can also work upon it to make it more broad-based and more different patterns of conducting the webinar can be, structures can be thought about to make it more and more interesting and more inclusive in that sense. One thing which you can do at the same time, because if the audience increases, you can have tell the audience to drop their questions in the chat box, and from there the moderator can put the questions, because sometimes it would become overlapping and the too many persons would start asking questions at the same time and it would create difficulty. So it's an initial beginning stage, and therefore you can keep on working upon it. I can only give my best wishes to all of you, and I really look forward to take this opportunity, because I could get an opportunity to have an interface with all of you, especially young lawyers who are the future of our High Court, and would bring laurels to our High Court in due time to come. Thank you, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.